13 violet metal sheets were connected to each other like a mini comic book. Its contents were viewable the moment he opened it. There were tiny words densely packed on every page and on both sides. Zhou Wen began reading from the back of the first page. It was indeed the opening of a typical primordial energy art. It mentioned things like the human magnetic field and primordial energy art. As he read it, Zhou Wen suddenly felt hungry. Recalling that his favorite salted eggs were among the food he had bought yesterday, he put down the Lost Immortal Sutra and peeled one to add it to a bowl of instant noodles. After he had finished eating, he returned to read Lost Immortal Sutra, only to realize that he had forgotten his reading progress. Zhou Wen frowned slightly. He was confident in his memory, and although it wasn't a photographic one, he wouldn't forget anything he read for a couple of years. Yet, in less than 10 minutes, he had forgotten the few lines he had just read. Reading the Lost Immortal Sutra again, he was astonished to realize that it wasn't as simple as forgetting his reading progress. When he read it from the beginning, he found the content equally unfamiliar, as though it was the first time he was reading it. He had apparently forgotten all the content he had read just minutes ago. There's indeed something odd about this. Zhou Wen continued reading before finding himself feeling hungry again. He needed some more food. This moment of distraction was enough to make him forget his reading progress in Lost Immortal Sutra. When he read from the beginning, he found the content he had just read unfamiliar once more. He had forgotten the content again. Zhou Wen refused to have his beliefs shaken as he picked up his phone, opened its notes app, and began recording the content he read from the violet sheet. However, whenever Zhou Wen memorized a sentence and turned his gaze to the phone, he would find his thoughts a blank when he tried to input the content. He couldn't recall the line he had just memorized. After attempting to memorize the Lost Immortal Sutra again, Zhou Wen quickly discovered that he could clearly remember the content when reading it, but once he moved his gaze away in a bid to record it, everything would be forgotten. Zhou Wen attempted to write as he read, but it was useless. Just any level of distraction was enough to wipe his memories of Lost Immortal Sutra's content. He tried using his phone to snap pictures of the Lost Immortal Sutra, but after taking a few pictures, he found that the pictures only showed the metal sheet being a uniform violet color without any engravings. This Lost Immortal Sutra is indeed odd. Not only can't I divert my attention to read it, but I'll be affected by the text within when focusing, getting distracted by my various emotions. It's truly bizarre. Zhou Wen thought as he looked at the Lost Immortal Sutra engraved on the metal sheets. Unbeknownst to him, this Lost Immortal Sutra wasn't only simple but bizarre. He just experienced distractions in the beginning, but towards the end, it escalated to something far more fatal. Many epic stage experts in history had died because of reading of Lost Immortal Sutra. Even if they were lucky to survive, they would go crazy and become no different from an idiot. Even Jing Daoxian wasn't able to finish reading Lost Immortal Sutra after obtaining it. He closed it after reading it midway without daring to continue. If it wasn't because the Lost Immortal Sutra had a magical connection to its owner, making it impossible to forcefully abandon it, Jing Daoxian wouldn't have kept it on him. If it wasn't because of the influence that Lost Immortal Sutra exerted on him, Jing Daoxian wouldn't have been injured inside a dimensional zone. He had originally planned on finding a way of disposing of it. When Zhou Wen declined Jing Daoxian's Skyfian treatise, the latter was insistent that Zhou Wen cultivated in the primordial energy art he had given. Not only did he want Zhou Wen to cultivate it, but he also wanted Zhou Wen to suffer for his actions. He even wanted him to die a tragic death. This was the reason why he had given the Lost Immortal Sutra to him. His vile nature was absolutely nothing the average person could compare with. He was truly a devil. Due to the strangeness of the Lost Immortal Sutra, Zhou Wen didn't continue reading. He even wanted to experiment if anything would happen to him if he distanced himself from the metal slab and the Lost Immortal Sutra. In a hotel suite in Guide City, a few people were sitting around a table, discussing something. If Zhou Wen were around, he would have recognized them to be the uniformed personnel he had met that fateful night. We let Jing Daoxian escape once again. Damn it, a man said angrily. It hadn't been easy for them to acquire clues of Jing Daoxian's whereabouts. Furthermore, the latter was heavily injured, giving them their best chance of apprehending him. Yet, they had still failed to catch up to him. Despite being so heavily injured, how did he break through our blockade and escape without us realizing it? A woman said, perplexed. Regardless of how injured he is still Jing Daoxian nonetheless. We shouldn't take it to heart. If we had locked down all of Guide City in the beginning, we might have stood a chance of finding him. Everyone exchanged their views, except for a man who remained silent. At the seat of honor, he rhythmically tapped the table's surface as he hung his eyelids low, seemingly in thought. Minister Qiao, what's your take on this? A blonde, green-eyed lady gave the man a teasing look as she asked with a coquettish voice. Qiao Sichuan looked up slightly when he heard her question. Stopping his tapping of the table, he swept his gaze across everyone. How long did Jing Daoxian spend in Guide City, from the moment he entered until he left? Qiao Sichuan didn't reply to the lady's question and returned with a question. The woman switched on her tablet and said after taking a look at the information. For a person like Jing Daoxian with extremely powerful perception, it won't be easy for cameras to capture any traces of him. Thankfully, the eye in the sky is a rather well-refined system. There are certain areas that make it impossible to escape surveillance. From the video feed we have at present, we can determine that Jing Daoxian entered Guide City at approximately 8:30 p.m. and left at 9:20 p.m., spending a total of 50 minutes in Guide City. After Kiao Sichuan heard this, he picked up his pen and drew out a red line on Guide City's map. This is the path we took while pursuing Jing Daoxian. Based on the information we have at present, he has suffered grievous injuries, so he can't advance too quickly. In addition, there are no reports of him using any transportation. Based on the snapshots occasionally taken by the eye in the sky, that's indeed the case. Jing Daoxian didn't walk very quickly, reaching the square's vicinity at approximately 8:55 p.m. The lady briefed him in detail. Then, did you notice that the distance between Xinjiang Road to Changjing Road only takes up less than 5% of his entire trajectory in Guide City? Yet, he spent nearly 10 minutes there. Can someone tell me why? Kiao Sichuan glared at everyone as he asked. Perhaps he needed to tend to his wounds. A young man suggested. Kiao Sichuan said stoically, does anyone of you remember our encounter with a high schooler on that stretch of road? Everyone took some time to recall. When the lady realized what he was talking about, she hurriedly said, the youth who you asked about Jing Daoxian's direction of escape. Article 32 of 1597. Kiao Sichuan nodded gently. That's right. He's the one. Minister, do you think that youth is in cahoots with Jing Daoxian? The blonde, green-eyed lady asked Kiao Sichuan. Kiao Sichuan focused on the laid-out map on the table before saying, no. He's likely an ordinary high schooler. However, since he met Jing Daoxian in that period of time, perhaps we might be able to understand why Jing Daoxian had spent abnormal amounts of time in that area through him. Think of a way to find that high schooler. Everyone exchanged looks. They hadn't especially taken note of the youth that passed them by. Furthermore, it was in the evening and the youth hadn't worn anything that made himself stand out. To seek him out without a clue left them somewhat at a loss. I'll sketch up the youth for you. To appear in that vicinity at that time while wearing home clothes means that he lives nearby. Check the nearby cameras to see if they manage to capture him. Bring him back as quickly as possible, Kiao Sichuan said. With the Lost Immortal Sutra in hand, Zhou Wen originally had the intention of leaving it somewhere far from home. However, the moment he left his doorstep, he saw a car parked along the street. Li Xuan was inside the car, waving at him. Is there something wrong? Zhou Wen walked over and asked. Get in the car first. Li Xuan opened the door and moved inside, gesturing for him to get in. Zhou Wen thought for a moment and got in. Li Xuan closed the door and rolled up the window. Then, he unlocked his phone and handed it to Zhou Wen. Take a look at this. Zhou Wen gave him a suspicious glance and discovered that there was a picture shown on the screen, a document. As the text was too tiny, Zhou Wen had no choice but to swipe across the phone screen to zoom in. Only then did he see what the document was about. It appeared to be a draft, indicating that a new dimensional zone had been found in the vicinity of Ancient Inlet. Furthermore, companion beasts in the form of organs had been discovered inside. The report then provided some data and analysis. Why are you showing me this? Zhou Wen asked Li Xuan with a perplexed look. Li Xuan answered in excitement, Ancient Inlet is inside Sunset College. This newly discovered dimensional zone will be Sunset Colleges in the future. So what? Zhou Wen still didn't get Li Xuan's excitement. So what? It means that students of Sunset College will have the opportunity of entering this newly discovered dimensional zone in the future. They will have a chance of obtaining organ-type companion beasts. Seeing Zhou Wen's unfazed expression, Li Xuan continued, companion beasts in the form of organs are extremely rare. You might not have heard of them, but I can very responsibly tell you that those things are a lot more precious than the typical companion beast. Let me put it this way. If your heart were to be wrecked by someone, or if you were on your deathbed with a heart disease, having a companion beast in the shape of a heart means it could fuse with your heart and replace your original heart. It would enhance your heart's functionality. It does sound useful. Zhou Wen finally had a chance to speak after listening for a period of time. It's far from useful. Let me ask you. Do you know how many elderly people in the league die a year from heart diseases? And how many people die from tumors in their organs? Organ-type companion beasts can be sold for astronomical prices. Besides, even if you don't sell it and keep it for yourself, it will be equivalent to having an additional life when you adventure in dimensional zones. Li Xuan droned on before ending with one statement. The benefits of that dimensional zone producing organ-type companion beasts is something only members of Sunset College can enjoy. Don't hesitate any further. Follow me to Sunset College. Delay any further and it will be too late. If this piece of news is officially announced, all the top students across the country will swarm to apply at Sunset College. That special admissions quota won't be enough. All right. I'll head back and do the registration. Zhou Wen didn't hesitate and agreed to it. Although he didn't wish to have ties with the Yin family, he also didn't wish for the Yin family to affect his normal life. Since applying to Sunset College brought about so many benefits, there was no reason for him to give it up, much less give it up because of the Yin family. Fill in the application on the internet before handing me your identification card. Leave the rest to me, Li Xuan hurriedly said. In fact, after Zhou Wen had his college entrance examination results, all he needed to do was apply at Sunset College's official website and await admission. With Zhou Wen's results, it wasn't a problem for him to be admitted under ordinary circumstances. However, things were no longer the same. Once the discovery of organ-type companion beasts had been announced, competition for the limited number of spots would become intense. Zhou Wen might not be admitted as a result. Li Xuan took Zhou Wen's identification card and planned on using some of his connections to get him admitted to Sunset College. Zhou Wen didn't speak further. After registering on the website with his phone, he gave his identification card to Li Xuan. That should be it. I'll be heading back to Luang. If there's nothing else for you here, pack up and head with me to Luang. I'll take you around to familiarize you with Luang and Sunset College's campus, Li Xuan said as he put away the identification card. All right. Wait a moment. Zhou Wen got out of the car and headed home to pack up. Wait. I'll help you with the packing. Li Xuan got out of the car and followed Zhou Wen home. Zhou Wen didn't have much to pack to begin with. After packing up some of his daily necessities and clothes, he left Guide City with Li Xuan. Guide City wasn't too far from Luang. Before the dimensional storms happened, it took about 3 to 4 hours by car. However, many areas these days had turned into dimensional zones. Circling around them doubled the journey time at the very least, so it took them more than 10 hours to get there. Li Xuan had wanted to have a good chat with Zhou Wen, but to his dismay, Zhou Wen began gaming the moment he got into the car. His eyes stayed peeled to the screen, leaving Li Xuan somewhat depressed. Is this guy for real? Does he have such skills despite being so obsessed with gaming? Li Xuan was very experienced when it came to acting, especially when it came to playing the pig to prey on tigers. But regardless of how he looked at it, Zhou Wen didn't seem to be acting. He truly looked obsessed with gaming. Li Xuan sat there watching Zhou Wen game for quite a while before becoming extremely bored. Wasn't it just the constant grinding of some monster ants? Such repetitive and boring games had lost favor decades ago. Zhou Wen, is that game so fun? Bored after watching for a while, Li Xuan asked. It's fun, Zhou Wen said without looking away from the screen. As he was afraid that Li Xuan had noticed something, he didn't enter the ancient imperial city. Instead, he kept grinding at the ant nest. After obtaining the mysterious phone, Zhou Wen had already looked up most of the dimensional zones on Earth. Although there were a few dimensional zones that resembled the ant nest, they were different from the one in-game. Vigor ants didn't exist either. Article 33 of 1597. Li Xuan found it boring as he closed his eyes to circulate his primordial energy to begin cultivating his invincible connate divine art. As for Zhou Wen, he controlled his blood-colored avatar and stormed towards the silver-winged flying ant. Although he had the experience gleaned from killing the skeleton general, a legendary stage creature, he found his ability falling short when facing the silver-winged flying ant. He was killed after a few clashes. This silver-winged flying ant seems more difficult to deal with than the skeleton general. It's faster and it has the ability of flight. It's unrestricted due to the lack of the skeleton horse. Zhou Wen frowned slightly. He originally thought that he had improved significantly over the recent period of time, but after a clash with the silver-winged flying ant, he realized how small the improvement was. If I can incubate the skeleton general's companion egg, I should be able to kill the silver-winged flying ant using the skeleton general's strength to fight it. Unfortunately, as I don't have the invincible connate divine art, it's almost impossible for me to incubate a legendary stage companion egg at the mortal stage. As Zhou Wen thought over the matter, he went back to his original thoughts of combining Inch Punch and Vigor Divine Fist. However, he didn't have the means to practice while in the car. Having reached a bottleneck in-game and unable to make any progress, he felt that it was pointless continuing, for it was a waste of his blood. Seeing Li Xuan enter a cultivation state, and with the driver not taking a look back at the situation, Zhou Wen took out the Lost Immortal Sutra and planned on reading the contents within. The Lost Immortal Sutra had the ability to perplex the mind. Even a terrifying expert like Jing Daoxian was unable to focus fully to finish reading the text. However, Zhou Wen was different. As the former principal of Guide High School had mentioned, Zhou Wen could be absolutely focused on anything if he so wished. This was the main reason for his excellent studies and fast cultivation. Now, with Zhou Wen's mind completely settled, he read the Lost Immortal Sutra without any distractions. The power of the text that could perplex the human mind failed to distract Zhou Wen at all. The focused Zhou Wen just wanted to finish reading the contents, his brain didn't have any capacity for second thoughts. So even though the textual power of the Lost Immortal Sutra was extremely bewitching, the thoughts failed to distract him. No one had ever been able to read Lost Immortal Sutra from cover to cover, yet Zhou Wen managed to do so without any incidents occurring. Zhou Wen was completely engrossed as he finished reading it. Humans had a plethora of emotions that could cause them to be enticed by various things. Even Buddha found it difficult to remain unmoved. So although it wasn't the case that there wasn't anyone who could finish reading the Lost Immortal Sutra, there was only a handful. People like Zhou Wen, who could dedicate himself once they made up their mind to be truly focused, were an extremely small minority in the league. Even epic stage bigwigs whose strength far exceeded Zhou Wen couldn't achieve this focused state of mind. Even the immortals of heaven would be lost to the enticement, giving Lost Immortal Sutra its name. Zhou Wen managed to read it from cover to cover without being perplexed by the textual power. The Lost Immortal Sutra, which had never been read by others, finally appeared in Zhou Wen's eyes in their entirety. When Zhou Wen had finished reading the final word of Lost Immortal Sutra, he suddenly felt his body quake. Primordial energy in his body began automatically flowing at some point in time. In the past, Zhou Wen had cultivated years of ascetic meditation, so once his primordial energy did a circulation, it would circulate in the ascetic meditation's trajectory. However, this time, the primordial energy's trajectory followed a strange path that Zhou Wen had never seen before. It nearly coursed through his entire body in constant circulation. Based on what Zhou Wen knew, any kind of primordial energy art had a beginning and an end. For example, ascetic meditation's beginning point was in the Danshan Sea of Energy. When the primordial energy flowed out of it, it would follow his meridians and ultimately return to the Sea of Energy after completing one circulation. The Sea of Energy was the reservoir of primordial energy. Most primordial energy arts were the same. Certain special primordial energy arts would forge an extremely special sea of energy in particular regions, or multiple ones. However, they were ultimately meant as a reservoir for primordial energy. Now, Zhou Wen's physical situation was a little odd. The primordial energy in his body kept flowing repeatedly without stopping. There wasn't anywhere he could store his primordial energy or for it to stop. It was like a perpetually moving train on a circular track. Zhou Wen was somewhat alarmed as he attempted to circulate ascetic meditation to redirect the out-of-control primordial energy back to a proper trajectory. However, he quickly realized that the ascetic meditation he had been cultivating for years was helpless. The primordial energy didn't listen to his instructions. He didn't panic as a result. He carefully sensed the trajectory of his primordial energy circulation and quickly discovered that the trajectory followed the Lost Immortal Sutra's circulation trajectory. I actually still remember the Lost Immortal Sutra. Zhou Wen was somewhat taken aback when he thought of the Lost Immortal Sutra. After all, he had been thinking about other things, but at this moment, he still remembered it clearly. He could recall each and every word of the entire Lost Immortal Sutra. There weren't any signs of forgetting them as he had previously. If the narrow-minded Jing Daoxian were to know that Zhou Wen hadn't died from reading the Lost Immortal Sutra in its entirety to the point of gaining a basic mastery of it, he would probably throw up blood in anger. Unable to stop his primordial energy from circulating, Zhou Wen could only take the risk to cultivate in the Lost Immortal Sutra. Once he tried, he felt his primordial energy immediately course into light, answering to the call of the Lost Immortal Sutra. He originally intended to read the Lost Immortal Sutra's content once, but to his surprise, he actually ended up mastering it after he had finished reading. He had no idea if it was a boon or bane for him. Zhou Wen entered a cultivation state without realizing that the 13 violet metal sheets had gradually turned to dust and vanished when he began cultivating the Lost Immortal Sutra. After cultivating it, he found several points of interest. It really didn't have a concept of a sea of energy. His primordial energy would constantly circulate around his body unceasingly, like the blood that coursed through his veins. Zhou Wen's circulation of the Lost Immortal Sutra allowed him to control the speed of the primordial energy flow, but he wasn't able to completely stop it. Even if he didn't circulate the Lost Immortal Sutra, his primordial energy would continue circulating slowly, following the Lost Immortal Sutra's pathways. With the circulation of the Lost Immortal Sutra, Zhou Wen felt his entire body abruptly become light. It felt as though his body had its shackles unlocked, giving him an indescribable sense of freedom and comfort. But other than that, there was nothing special. He hadn't advanced to the legendary stage and it was still slowly circulating. Zhou Wen realized that he didn't need to deliberately cultivate in the Lost Immortal Sutra. When he opened his eyes to move about, he found that the primordial energy would continue to circulate automatically. His actions didn't influence it at all. I have to cultivate even if I don't wish to. Zhou Wen sighed secretly. Without needing to deliberately cultivate Lost Immortal Sutra and with nothing else to do, Zhou Wen picked up the mysterious phone and used the hidden needle in his ring to stab his finger, dripping a drop of blood onto the phone screen. This time, Zhou Wen wasn't in a rush to enter the game dungeons. He first took a look at his stats in-game. Zhou Wen. Age 16 years. Lifeform level mortal. Strength 10. Speed 10. Constitution 10. Primordial energy 10. Primordial energy art Lost Immortal Sutra. Primordial energy skill Vigor Divine Fist Skeleton Palm. Companion beast Mutated Vigor Ant Mortal. Article 34 of 1597. Zhou Wen was slightly surprised. He hadn't advanced to the legendary stage, but all his stats had risen by 1 point, from 9 to 10. This increment of 1 point left Zhou Wen somewhat amazed. This was because 9 seemed to be the limits of the mortal stage. If one didn't advance to the legendary stage, absorbing dimensional crystals with values of 10 or more was useless. This had already been proven when he absorbed the 13-valued speed crystal. However, the appearance of the Lost Immortal Sutra had broken that limitation. What kind of primordial energy art is Lost Immortal Sutra? The moment he thought of it, he realized that the 13 violet metallic sheets had vanished at some point in time. Beside him, Li Xuan was still in cultivation while the driver ahead was isolated from them by a transparent bulletproof glass. It was impossible for them to have taken the Lost Immortal Sutra away. Zhou Wen searched everywhere for the Lost Immortal Sutra's violet metallic sheets to no avail. How odd. Zhou Wen frowned slightly, unsure if the loss of the Lost Immortal Sutra was a good or bad thing. But since he couldn't find it, Zhou Wen didn't force it. Seeing Li Xuan still cultivating his invincible Kannate divine art, he raised his phone and began gaming. However, killing ordinary vigor ants and mutated vigor ants were of little meaning. He quit the game after playing for a while, leaning into his seat and sleeping. If the typical person wanted to sleep, it wasn't something that could happen at will. However, Zhou Wen was different. If he wished to sleep, he could quickly fall asleep anytime, anywhere. Even if perilous situations were all around him, he could still fall asleep. This was a type of talent that not everyone was capable of. The reason Zhou Wen decided to sleep now was to figure out if he would still suffer from sleep paralysis after mastering Lost Immortal Sutra. Badump. Badump. Shortly after he fell asleep, Zhou Wen felt his heart race again. He felt stifled in the chest as though something was pressing down on him. Damn it, here it comes again. Zhou Wen was stumped. He had already cultivated the Lost Immortal Sutra, but the anomaly of sleep paralysis remained. Not only had it not been removed, but it had appeared to have worsened. Zhou Wen could vaguely hear strange murmurings by his ears. They didn't sound like they came from the mortal world, appearing in an oxymoronic manner of being extremely far and extremely near. He couldn't figure out what was being said as they sounded like the ravings of devils in hell. In this turbid half-sleep state, Zhou Wen snapped awake from the abnormal state of sleep paralysis only when Li Xuan nudged him awake. However, unlike the last two instances of sleep paralysis, Zhou Wen didn't have the discomfort of having the urge to vomit. He had only broken out into a cold sweat. He felt refreshed when the wind blew on him, giving him a better state of mind. Sunset College follows the management model of a partially restricted state. After we matriculate, we will have to stay in dorms. Even I'm no exception. Before that, why don't you stay at my place? Li Xuan got out of the car and took Zhou Wen to a villa. After the dimensional storms, due to Luang being rich in pan-dimensional resources, it quickly became a first-tier city of the League's East District. This area was also the most flourishing area in the city, so every spot was worth its weight in gold. People who could live in such villas were both rich and noble. Zhou Wen wasn't surprised that Li Xuan could live in a place like this. What left him surprised that apart from Li Xuan's driver, this massive villa didn't have a single servant. Don't tell me you clean such a huge place alone? Zhou Wen asked while sitting on the sofa. There were a few servants in the past, but I managed to get rid of them. After all, I don't want outsiders to know of certain matters. Li Xuan took out a beverage can from the refrigerator and threw it at Zhou Wen. He then continued with a smile, besides, I seldom return here. As a profligate scion, I naturally have to spend my nights out. That matches my persona. As for you, feel free to stay here. After school begins, I'll think of a way to get the school to assign us the same dorm. Aren't there any single-person dorms in school? Zhou Wen frowned slightly. He had been used to living alone from a young age. Besides, he needed to game, so it would be better if he lived alone. No. The League has always been thinking up means to nurture our teamwork. Be it in the combat test of having 4 people a team or the team assignments during university, it's all built on this premise. It's especially so for Sunset College, which has a military background. The management style is also partially militaristic. It's impossible to get a single room. Even In Jing has to live in a group dorm, Li Xuan said. And Jing has also entered Sunset College. Zhou Wen was slightly taken aback. Definitely. Her elder brother is overseer in Tianzuo, one of the military brass. She definitely will attend Sunset College, which has a militaristic background. Having said that, Li Xuan looked at Zhou Wen with a cheeky smile. Bro, tell me. How the hell did you offend In Jing? She even especially transferred to Guide High School to beat you up. And Jing would never have done something like that in the past. Zhou Wen thought and asked Li Xuan, do you know Ouyang Lan? Of course, if one doesn't know Ouyang Lan in a place like Luang, they would have lived here for nothing, Li Xuan said with a smile. Don't tell me you offended Ouyang Lan. Then you are truly unlucky. It's no wonder In Jing came over to beat you up. Zhou Wen shook his head. I didn't offend Ouyang Lan. Then why did you mention her? Li Xuan looked at Zhou Wen, baffled. Zhou Wen asked again, has something happened to Ouyang Lan recently? Yes. Who in Luang City doesn't know that Ouyang Lan has remarried? However, there wasn't any grand wedding. Only a few close relatives and friends were invited for a gathering. Outsiders don't even know what kind of man Ouyang Lan has married. I heard it's a translator with the surname Zhou. Having said that, Li Xuan's eyes widened. He looked at Zhou Wen and asked, your surname is Zhou as well? Don't tell me that there's some relationship between the two of you. Zhou Wen shook his head without a word. Li Xuan felt his curiosity itching at him but was helpless with Zhou Wen refusing to speak. After Zhou Wen took up residence in Li Xuan's place, he went to his room and immediately called Zhou Lingfeng. Zhou Lingfeng was his father, not his son. It wasn't his prerogative to question Zhou Lingfeng's decisions. Therefore, Zhou Wen had never delved deep into his thoughts before. In fact, Zhou Lingfeng had never overturned Zhou Wen's decisions. He hadn't even participated or given his advice on something as major as attending university. This had seemingly become something tacit between the father-son duo. Zhou Wen called Zhou Lingfeng to inform him that he was in Luang and would be attending school at Sunset College. Son, you're done with the college entrance exam. How did you do? Zhou Lingfeng's voice sounded over the phone, sounding lethargic. Not bad. I applied for Sunset College. If nothing surprising crops up, I'll be attending school at Sunset College in the future, Zhou Wen said. Sunset College. Isn't that in Luang? Come over and live with me then, Zhou Lingfeng said. There's no need to. I'll be staying at a friend's place for the time being. I'll be living on campus once I matriculate. Zhou Wen didn't wish to have any ties with the Yin family. Zhou Lingfeng didn't force him. All right then. If there's anything, just tell me. I'll make sure to help you. You are already in college, so you aren't young anymore. I'll give you a bit more living allowance in the future. Zhou Wen didn't reject it but asked, Dad, where do you obtain the sun strafe art from? Article 35 of 1597. What sun strafe art? Zhou Lingfeng asked in surprise. Didn't you get in Jing to send me the sun strafe art? Zhou Wen was also taken aback. It's not like you don't know that I have zero interest in cultivation. I don't know much about such matters, Zhou Lingfeng said. Zhou Wen fell silent in thought. If the sun strafe art wasn't given to him by Zhou Lingfeng, then why did Jing claim that it was given by Zhou Lingfeng? Matters had seemed to become somewhat complicated. What is Jing up to? Is the sun strafe art real or fake? Zhou Wen was momentarily unable to figure things out. Zhou Wen had no means to figure out the authenticity of the sun strafe art. The average person had no means of coming into contact with the sun strafe art, so it was even more impossible to determine its authenticity. Meanwhile, Zhou Lingfeng continued, if it was given by little Jing, it might be some well-meant. Just keep it for now. I'll ask her when I meet her again. All right. Zhou Wen didn't continue. Zhou Lingfeng's impression of the Yin family siblings seemed pretty good, so it was pointless to say anything else until he figured out the truth. Everyone had their independent thought processes. It was impossible to force someone to view things from your own point of view, even the person closest to you. Only reality had convincing power. Zhou Wen had understood this reason from a young age. After hanging up, Zhou Wen composed himself. He didn't game but instead began practicing his palm techniques. He had tried many times but had failed to use the force-exerting principles of inch punch on Vigor Divine Fist. Therefore, he went for second best in a bid to fuse skeleton palm and inch punch together as a reference. With complete focus, he used the techniques of inch punch when delivering skeleton palm. Skeleton palm's uniqueness was indeed compatible with inch punch. This process was a lot smoother than Zhou Wen imagined. The first few palm strikes were somewhat rough as he failed to fuse the two together correctly. However, it didn't take long for Zhou Wen to grasp the trick. The fusion of the two attacks became increasingly better. After striking out about 10 times, Zhou Wen's primordial energy was completely drained. All he could do was go in-game to grind on vigor ants to use the primordial energy crystals that appeared to replenish his primordial energy for further practice. Shortly after he entered the game, Zhou Wen was astonished to discover that his primordial energy had already recovered a little before a primordial energy crystal dropped. Back when he cultivated ascetic meditation, it would take him about an hour to recover one primordial energy point. Now, only a few minutes had passed for him to recover 1 point of primordial energy. The speed at which the recovery far exceeded his imagination. Is this the outcome of Lost Immortal Sutra? Zhou Wen felt the primordial energy slowly coursing through his body as he felt some delight. To achieve such primordial energy recovery speeds at the mortal stage was unprecedented according to what Zhou Wen knew. Ignoring whether the Lost Immortal Sutra had any other uses or not, just this one trait alone was sufficiently shocking. While grinding in-game with the blood-colored avatar, the mysterious phone was purely controlled by a touchscreen. However, the control of the blood-colored avatar didn't require any contact with the screen. Most of the time, just thinking was enough to control it. There was some psychic connection between the two. Thoughts and feelings were synchronized, so all the battle experience the blood-colored avatar received in-game was shared with Zhou Wen. Upon seeing a mutated vigor ant crawl over, Zhou Wen controlled his phone's angle and used his thoughts to control the blood-colored avatar. He wanted to attempt to see if he could fuse skeleton palm and inch punch together. When the blood-colored avatar struck the mutated vigor ant on the head with its palm, the carapace on the mutated vigor ant's head remained undamaged. However, after lunging forward a few steps, the mutated vigor ant staggered before collapsing onto the ground. On the left corner of the phone screen, killed mortal mutated vigor ant. The first line wasn't of anything to take note of since Zhou Wen had seen it countless times. Besides, this mutated vigor ant hadn't dropped anything. It was the second line that left Zhou Wen somewhat surprised. Acquired skeleton palm's high-level skill. Skeleton palm has evolved into ashen palm. Zhou Wen glanced at the blood-colored avatar's stats and found that the skeleton palm in the primordial energy skill row had vanished. Replacing it was a primordial energy skill known as ashen palm. Primordial energy skill, Vigor Divine Fist, rank 9. Primordial energy skill, ashen palm, rank 10. Rank 10. Wasn't skeleton palm a rank 1 primordial energy skill? How did it become rank 10 after it evolved into ashen palm? Zhou Wen was somewhat puzzled. Ashen palm at rank 10 required expending 5 primordial energy points with each use. Its cost was the same as the rank 9 Vigor Divine Fist. From the primordial energy cost, a rank 10 ashen palm likely has the same potency as a rank 9 Vigor Divine Fist. Zhou Wen had the intention to test the potency of ashen palm, but ordinary vigor ants and mutated vigor ants were unable to withstand this single strike. It didn't matter if it was rank 1 or rank 9. After some thought, Zhou Wen decided to leave the Ant Nest dungeon and switch to entering the ancient Imperial City dungeon. As long as the blood-colored avatar didn't die, leaving a dungeon and re-entering or switching dungeons didn't require him to waste blood. However, if the blood-colored avatar didn't die, the game dungeons wouldn't refresh, so the creatures in the dungeons wouldn't be refreshed either. The blood-colored avatar had previously died in the Ant Nest, so after entering Ancient Imperial City, the dimensional creatures in Ancient Imperial City had already reappeared. The blood-colored avatar rode the mutated Vigor Ant as it stormed ahead and soon found the newly spawned Skeleton General. Like previously, he made the blood-colored avatar jump off the mutated Vigor Ant and charge at the Skeleton General. Using his positioning techniques to circle around the skeleton horse, it took him less than 20 minutes to find an opportunity. He got the blood-colored avatar to leap up and ride on the skeleton horse's back, sitting right behind the Skeleton General. However, this time, Zhou Wen didn't get the blood-colored avatar to strike the Skeleton General's weakness, the eye sockets. Instead, he directly struck at the back of the Skeleton General's skull with his palm. This palm didn't injure the Skeleton General's head at all. However, the blood-colored flames in the skull seemed to splatter out like a crushed watermelon. Due to the momentum of the strike, the Skeleton General lunged forward on the skeleton horse before his bones scattered, turning into a pile on the ground. Killed Legendary Skeleton General. Discovered Skeleton General Dimensional Crystal. Zhou Wen looked at the dimensional crystal that had dropped in-game, feeling a pleasant surprise. Ashen Palm could destroy the Skeleton General even without striking its weakness. Its potency was clearly above the rank 9 Vigor Divine Fist. A rank 10 Primordial Energy skill is indeed powerful. I wonder if Ashen Palm has a chance of killing the silver-winged flying ant. Zhou Wen had the urge to immediately storm to the silver-winged flying ant to give it a try. Vigor Divine Fist was too slow when it came to throwing a punch, preventing him from touching the silver-winged flying ant. However, Ashen Palm didn't have such a weakness. It was extremely fast when delivering a palm strike. Article 36 of 1597.